reason why, he said, when the women indignantly asked him why that was, he responded that it's because women were deficient in religion and in intellect. And they asked him again, how is that? And he pointed to this verse of the Quran and said, you're deficient in intellect, obviously, because your testimony is devalued, and deficient in religion because when menstruating, you're not allowed to pray in the mosque. And so this was an inequality of intellect, an inequality of spirituality, an inequality of rights before the law resulting from it. And so here again, the question before us is, does Islam guarantee equality of rights to women? Obviously, by the testimony of the Quran itself and Islamic law, and Muhammad, the Prophet of Islam, it manifestly does not. Chapter 4, verse 11 of the Quran says, Allah directs you as regards your children's inheritance. To the male, a portion equal to that of 2 females. Let me repeat that. To the male, a portion equal to that of 2 females. That is not equality of rights. Now, I would remind you once again that I am quoting from the Quran, and the Imam Moustafa may say that this is all out of context, but he cannot, at least if he has any interest in the truth, which is of course not at all established, but if he does, then he cannot deny that these things are elements of Islamic law to this day, and that in Islamic law, as is the consensus, the ijma of all the 4 madhab of the Sunnis, the schools of jurisprudence, it is agreed upon by them that a man should have greater inheritance rights than a woman, that a woman should not have the same value in her testimony as a man, and indeed is barred from testifying at all in cases of zina or sexual indiscretion, even if she is the victim. Testimony is devalued altogether. And that there is this mandate for inequality that manifests itself in many ways, which I'm sure we will discuss. But the record of Islamic law is clear. And so this is not the matter of some obscure village or out of context citations. This is a matter of the Quran itself as interpreted by mainstream Islamic authorities.
Thank you, Mr. Spencer. Thank you, Robert. We will now move into the first rebuttal, and you have, at this point, Moustafa, you have 5 minutes, and you may start right now.
Thank you. Mr. Spencer quoted a verse in the Quran that is chapter 4, number 34. And obviously, exactly as I predicted, the verse says, الرجال قوامون على النساء. The verb that Mr. Spencer conveniently, totally obliterated, قوامون means to attend to. The building superintendent is not the owner of the building or the boss of all the tenants. Attend to. The responsibility of the man to be the man in the house, as in our American culture, stems from what the verse is after that, by them providing the family and carrying the responsibility of the family. So men are no way better than women in Islam. So easy, I can go to the Quran, and when the word says white, I can translate it conveniently to the word black, as per Mr. Spencer and what he does all the time. Mr. Spencer will never tell you the other verse in the Quran that says, وَلَهُنَّ مِثْلَ الَّذِي عَلَيْهِنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ. They have the same rights and obligations as men have rights and obligation. And the only degree that a man by default has, which is that he would be responsible for the family, is conditioned if he qualifies by when he supports the family, when he feeds and provides for the family. So there's nowhere in the Quran or the hadith of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ that men are better than women. And I would challenge him with any dictionary that qawamun means superior, only in the language of Mr. Spencer. And I'm shocked, actually, that Mr. Spencer, in the myriad of the nonsense that he brought verse 282, that I caught him, and I put a nationwide press release that the verse speaks about financial transactions, how to record them, when Mr. Spencer removed that in his book, The Truth About Muhammad, and claimed that the verse is about rape victims. Just show you the man who's, talking about, well, if I know my Quran or not. And he dares to bring it back in again, read his book and read my press release, and I'm going to put it on my blog tomorrow. The second thing, Mr. Spencer speaks about the same verse 434 when it says, well, if they commit nushuz, he'd say that, well, you can go ahead and beat him for any situation. The verse specifically, وَلَاتِ تَخَافُونَ نُشُوزَهِنَّ, the word nushuz is repeated only 2 times in the Quran. One time when it pertains to the nushuz of a wife, and one time in 4:128 when it pertains to the nushuz of a man. So it's not obedience or disobedience. Nushuz is when I go into a higher ground to look further. In the case of marriage, is to look further for another man or another woman. A man, when he looks for another woman in Islam with restrictions and guidelines, he can go ahead and get married publicly with, if the, meets the guidelines. But when a woman looks for another man, that's an abomination. And then you do not need to go to Imam Moustafa Zayed or any interpreter or anyone or any hadith. Let's go to the Prophet himself talking about the case, the exceptional case of when a wife's to be beaten. Rule number 1, لا تضربوا إماء الله. You cannot beat up the girls of Allah as per the hadith. That's the general rule. The extreme exception is when Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, in the greatest day in human history, when he said that the religion now is perfect and complete, he said, "Istawsu bin nisa'i khayra," deal with women righteously and equitably, and that's the general rule. إِلَّا أَنْ يَأْتِيَنَّ بِفَاحِشَةٍ مُبِينَةٍ, unless they come and commit a apparent abomination. Then فَضْرِبُوهُنَّ ضَرْبًا غَيْرَ مُبْرِحٍ, then beat him lightly, a slap on the wrist. In our legal courts, when somebody gets a judgment that is a slap of the wrist, that means that he got the lightest judgment ever. So when the wife commits a crime that is a aberrant abomination, 2 things. You want to give her to the cop, you want to give her to the correctional facility officer, you want to give her to the judge, or within her household, the husband will give her a psychological punishment that is a slap on the wrist. Which way you prefer? The rule is لا تضربوا إماء الله. But as I said, he goes to the extreme situation of a crime and try to make it the general rule. The thing about the inheritance, there's 34 cases of potential inheritance. 4 cases, a woman inherits half of the man. 30 cases, the other 30 cases, a woman inherits more, inherits the same, and in some cases, about 6 cases, she inherits and the man does not inherit whatsoever. So Mr. Spencer quotes you the 4 cases and does not quote you the remainder of the 30 cases. When he said that Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said that, a majority of hellfire might be of women, and when they asked him, he put in another hadith totally different about that you use emotions more than you use reason, and you have lesser ritual duties than men. He mixed 2 hadith together in his way. If you don't know, if you don't read, to confuse you, and I'll post on my blog both hadith, and you will see how Mr. Spencer is trying to outright deceive you.
Okay, well, we have one last rebuttal. This is for you, Robert. We have the clock reset now for 5 minutes, and then we'll be going into our break. So, Robert Spencer, 5 minutes.
Thank you. The deceiver here is the Imam Moustafa, as is clear from anybody who looks at the actual translations of the first part of verse 434, which he was disputing. He's saying that I made it up, that it says that it makes men superior to women. That's actually, I was reading from the translation of N.J. Dawood, who is a native speaker of Arabic from Iraq. I guess he got it wrong, or maybe I told him that he ought to mistranslate it in that way. But we can also go to the Muslim translators, Abdullah Yusuf Ali, very common mainstream translation, and he says, men are the protectors and maintainers of women because Allah has given the one more than the other. And Muhammad Marmaduke Pickthall, a celebrated English convert to Islam, who wrote another very common translation, men are in charge of women because Allah has made the one of them to excel the other. And M.J. Shakir, men are the maintainers of women because Allah has made some of them to excel others. And so apparently, with my deceiving black arts, I have misled all of these translators who wrote before I was born into mistranslating this verse in exactly the same way, to say that men excel women or are superior to women, and obviously not that they are equal to women. And so it's clear that the Imam Moustafa, while self-righteously claiming that I am deceiving, is actually trying to deceive on a grand scale. He's actually written a book-length treatment that is full of deceit called The Lies About Muhammad, which is very aptly named because that's all it is. And another one regards chapter 2, verse 282, which he's saying that he caught me out on. Actually, the Quran itself, it says, as I quoted before, that you should get a male witness, and if you cannot get a male witness, then you get, if there are not 2 men, then a man and 2 women, such as you choose for witnesses, so that if one of them errs, the other can remind her. That is the translation of Abdullah Yusuf Ali. It has nothing to do with rape in the context of the Quran, and I never said it did, but it does come into questions of rape when women's testimony is disallowed altogether, as is something that comes from Islamic law. Now, as far as the beating of the wife, it's interesting to note that this learned imam is actually granting that a husband does have the responsibility to beat a disobedient woman in Islam, but he's trying to convince us that it is a matter of only beating her lightly or giving her a tap on the wrist. Once again, I refer to translations of the Quran. These are all translations of the Quran made either by Muslims or by Islamic scholars. They are not my translations of the word in question, waridubhunna, and it says in Pickthall, and scourge them, or Sher Ali, and chastise them. Rodwell also, scourge them. Khalifa, Rashid Khalifa, beat them. Also Shakir, beat them. Al-Hilali and Khan say, beat them lightly, as does Yusuf Ali, but that lightly is not in the Arabic, as I'm sure that the Imam Moustafa, were he truthful, would have to admit. And that since, as I quoted the hadith, which is from Bukhari, from Muslim, that says that he hit Aisha and caused her pain, it is hard to understand how, if Muhammad is the supreme example of conduct, that his example would not be exemplary in this one particular. And I wonder what the authorities at Al-Azhar would think of Moustafa Zayed if they heard him contradicting Muhammad on this point. As for the other hadith in which women predominate in hell, that is easily found online, and if he's going to post his lies about it, I will post the truth about it at Jihad Watch tomorrow and give you the hadiths in question. There's also a great deal more, of course, that we were not able to address for reasons of time. For example, Muhammad saying, and this is a Bukhari hadith, if a husband calls his wife to his bed to have sexual relations and she refuses and causes him to sleep in anger, the angels will curse her till morning. And this is the foundation of the Islamic law, that a woman has no right to refuse sexual intercourse to her husband for any reason at any time. That reduces her essentially to the status of an object for procreation or sexual pleasure. It's kind of ironic that the Imam Moustafa said in his initial statement that a woman is not the object of desire, because it's essentially all that she is in Islam, is a plaything for sexual relations, and a cook, of course, and so on, but that's about it. There's another hadith in the same way. By him in whose hand lies my life, a woman cannot carry out the right of her Lord till she carries out the right of her husband. And if he asks her to surrender herself to him for sexual intercourse, she should not refuse him, even if she is on a camel's saddle. Now, this is plainly just another species of slavery, and has nothing to do with equality of rights. Whatever smoke this learned and highly deceitful imam chooses to blow tonight.
Okay, great. Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Moustafa. We have now just gone through the first 30 minutes or so of our first section of tonight's program. We're going to go to a quick break, and we'll be right back, and we'll continue with our two apologists. Again, Islam guarantees women equality of rights with men. We'll continue to discuss that tonight. Stay tuned also for an opportunity to give us a phone call here at 248-416-1300 with your questions. We look forward to that, and we'll be right back after this brief break.